You woke up to frost on the inside of your bedroom window, not the outside, the glass you could reach. If you grew up in this country in the 1970s, you know exactly what I mean. The pattern of it, the way it went to water under your thumb. We tell that story as proof Canadians were tough. It was never toughness. The average house here had 1,384 square centimeters of open gap in it, a window 15 inches square, permanently open, and by 1977, Ottawa had put $1.4 billion on the table to close it. January 28, 1977, a Friday. The kids in Fort Erie and Port Colborne went to school that morning in weather that felt like a break. Light snow, not much wind. By 11:30, you couldn't see across the road. Lake Erie had frozen over before Christmas, and all the snow sitting on top of it had nowhere to go. The wind picked up every bit of it at once. Gusts hit 111 kilometers an hour. Around 2,000 students across the region spent that night inside 24 schools because there was no road left to send a bus down. Snowmobiles became the ambulance service. 4x4s became the grocery run. And that January was the first one in southern Ontario's recorded history without a single thaw. And 1977 wasn't even the worst of it. 6 years earlier, on March 4th, 1971, Montreal took 43.2 centimeters of snow in a single day on gusts of 110 kilometers an hour. 47 centimeters by the end of it. 17 people died in the city, 30 across the province. It closed out the snowiest winter Montreal has ever recorded, 380 centimeters. And it forced the only weather postponement of a Canadiens home game in the history of the franchise. Now here's the part that gets left out of the storm stories. Those are the nights everyone remembers. The ordinary nights on either side of them are where the real problem lived, and nobody called those an emergency. They just closed another door. Act 2. The house was the problem. Go and look at the wall of a house built in this country before 1977, 4 inches thick, 2x4 studs, and whatever went in between them insulated to about R8. Now look at the window, one pane of glass. The best windows you could buy rated R2, and most houses didn't have those. They had a single sheet of glass in a wooden frame with a storm window screwed over the top of it every October. That's why the frost formed on the inside. Go up into the attic and it's worse. Bats laid loose between the joists, pulled apart at the ends, nothing at all over the top plate where the wall meets the roof. Go down to the basement and there's nothing on the walls whatsoever. Insulating one was a job that only started making financial sense once oil got expensive. There's a test for this. You seal a fan into the front door, run it, and count how many times in an hour it can pull all the air out of the house. New Canadian houses in that era came in around 9. 9 means the fan can empty and refill the entire volume of your house 9 times before the hour is out. On a windy night in January, you don't need the fan. The average house already standing came in around 6.85, and that's where the 1,384 square centimeters comes from. Somebody actually measured the gap. The people doing the measuring were out in Saskatchewan, and before that year was over, they'd have a house that beat every number on this list. The furnace wasn't heating your house, it was heating the backyard, one room at a time. You could see it from the street on any January morning because the roofs that went bare first were the ones with the least insulation under them. Act 3. What families actually did. So you didn't heat the house, you heated a room. The door at the top of the stairs stayed closed. The spare room stayed closed. There was a rolled towel along the bottom of the back door, and it lived there from November to April. Upstairs was a different climate. You got dressed under the covers. You laid your clothes on the register for 10 minutes first, if your register was one of the good ones. The bathroom was the worst room in the house, and every single person in it knew that, which is why nobody lingered in there in February. Everybody ended up in the same room after supper. That's part of why you remember those evenings the way you do. And when it got bad enough, somebody opened the oven door and left it open, which every parent knew you weren't supposed to do, and every parent did anyway. Tell me in the comments which room in your house was the cold one. Every family had one. Plastic went over the windows. Storm windows went up in October and came down in May. And if you ever helped carry one, you know exactly what that sounded like going into the frame. And most of those houses ran on oil. A truck came, a hose went into a pipe on the outside wall, and somebody inside stood at the window and watched the meter turn, which is why a lot of families stopped paying for heat altogether. On December 10th, 1979, CBC's Bob Allison reported from Atlantic Canada that people were splitting wood to get out from under the price of oil. He said it was happening so fast that governments had no figures on it at all. In Newfoundland alone, 5,000 airtight stoves sold in a single year, which brought its own trouble because an airtight stove damped down for an overnight burn smolders instead of burning clean, and a smoldering fire lines your chimney with creosote. Act 4. The bill arrived. None of this started in a Canadian kitchen. It started in October 1973, when the price of oil came off its leash and never went back. Ottawa set up a federal office of energy conservation in 1974. Then, on the 1st of September 1977, it did something much bigger. The Canadian Home Insulation Program opened at $1.4 billion, a grant of up to $350 covering 2/3 of your insulation materials, not the labor, chosen off a list of more than 235 approved products. More than 17,000 Canadians phoned the head office in Montreal in the first few weeks. Not every province got the same deal. Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island had been running their own version since February that year, with a ceiling of $500, no tax on it, and the labor covered as well, because heating cost more down there and everybody knew it. The federal rollout was staged by the age of your house. Year 1 covered homes built before 1941 in British Columbia, Newfoundland, and the Territories. Before 1921 in New Brunswick, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. The pitch was that proper insulation would take 1/3 off your heating bill, about $180 a year, which tells you what people were paying to stay warm, because $180 was only the 1/3 they were being promised back. Maclean's ran the arithmetic that October, and it came out badly. The grant was taxable, so a 2-child family on $15,000 handed about 118 of it straight back. And a large contracting firm in Halifax was charging $2,250 to insulate a basement. 20 years before that turned into savings. People did it anyway. By November 1979, 289,000 Canadians had insulated and applied. Only 2% of those applications came from landlords, which makes sense when the tenant is the one paying to heat the place. By October 1980, Ottawa had paid out more than $240 million to 690,000 homeowners, and the applications were still arriving at 10,000 a week. Before the program, most cities had a couple of insulation firms in the phone book. Maclean's counted an estimated 4,000 of them across the country by 1980, plenty with no name on the truck. Act 5, Regina, 1977. While all that was going on, a small team was finishing a house on Rink Avenue in Regina. The Saskatchewan Research Council had been asked for a solar house that would actually work on the prairies. Harold Orr's team ran the numbers on a standard 1970s house and found that the solar equipment of the day couldn't come anywhere close to heating one. Orr's comparison was a coffee maker against a thermos. A coffee maker keeps things warm while it's plugged in and switched on. A thermos stays warm on its own. 12-inch walls at R40, an R60 roof, triple glazing set deep in the openings, no basement, the whole floor lifted clear of the ground. One of the first heat recovery ventilators ever built because the house was sealed so tight it needed one. The blower door read 0.8, the most airtight house in the world at the time. It had no furnace at all. The estimated cost of the electricity to heat it was $30 to $40 a year. There was one thing the team got saddled with. The province insisted on a solar hot water system, and it cost about $65,000, more than the entire rest of the house, which came in around $60,000. Maintenance on it ran about $10,000 in the first year alone. The next owner tore it out. Orr's conclusion afterward was blunt. Every dollar they spent on stopping heat from leaving the house saved them at least 10 on solar equipment they then didn't have to buy. In 1978, as many as 1,000 people a week came through to look at it. ACT 6, The Turn. And there's a piece of that program that got quietly written out of the story. One of the products on that approved list was a foam pumped into your wall cavities through a drilled hole. Urea formaldehyde foam insulation. Canada Mortgage and Housing approved it for use here in 1977, and the grant helped pay for it. Somewhere between 80 and 100,000 Canadian homes got it. In December 1980, it was banned outright under the Hazardous Products Act. Owners had to declare it when they sold. Some of those houses went for a fraction of what they were worth. Later studies went back and found that formaldehyde levels in homes with the foam sat well under the health guideline. By then, it didn't matter. The word was already on the disclosure form. Close. The house on Rink Avenue is still standing, and its envelope still performs the way it was built to. In 2015, Germany's Passive House Institute gave that team a Pioneer Award, 38 years on, for a bungalow in Regina that Canada mostly forgot to copy. So when you remember, all of you piled into the one warm room, the door closed at the top of the stairs, your mom in a cardigan in her own kitchen. That was a house with 1,384 square centimeters of open air in it, and a family that had worked out exactly which door to shut first. On the night the schools filled up in Niagara, that was the difference between a bad night and a dangerous one, and that night has a story of its own.